And now it's my pleasure to introduce Alicia Hetman. Alicia is the AAUW California Title IX consultant, and she's a member of the California Public Policy Committee. She also serves on the National AAUW Public Policy Committee, and she's a former AAUW National Board member, and we're happy to have her with us. Alicia, take it away.
Thank you very much. I'm very excited to be here today to teach you a little more about Title IX and get you excited. And I want you to know that this webinar is going to provide you with a broad brushstroke of just a few of the Title IX provisions. This presentation may not answer all of your questions, but I am committed to providing ongoing opportunities for you to learn more. Now, before I get going, I want you to notice the pin I'm wearing tonight. This is my Breaking Through the Glass Ceiling pin, and I'm wearing it tonight to honor Kamala Harris, our first female Vice President of the United States. So I just wanted you to understand the significance of this pin. Both Hillary Clinton, Madeleine Albright have the same brooch, and I gave my original brooch to Lilly Ledbetter. So it's a very special pin. On another quick aside about this, a member in Texas sent me her pin that she got in quite a few years ago, and I will be getting it to Congresswoman Jackie Spear and see about having her take it to give it to Kamala, so she will also have the Breaking Through the Glass Ceiling pin. So I just wanted to share that great news. So let me begin by giving you a little historical perspective. During the 1950s and the 60s, Congress passed a number of laws providing financial aid to institutions of higher education and their students. In 1963, the U.S. Commission on the Status of Women issued a report documenting secondary status of women in the United States, with a special focus on women's economic disadvantages. One of the results of that study was the Equal Pay Act of 1963. Title IX's origin lies in the 1965 Presidential Executive Order 11246, prohibiting federal contractors from discrimination in employment on the basis of race, color, religion, or national origin. That executive order was amended by President Johnson effective October 13, 1968, to include discrimination based on sex. Many of the financial aid laws were set to expire in 1971, so in 1970, members of Congress introduced various bills to extend and expand these programs. Several key events led Congress to discuss legislation prohibiting sex discrimination in education in conjunction with the extension of these financial aid laws. In 1970, a presidential task force on women's rights and responsibilities issued its report that documented the existence of sex bias in American society and recommended legislative changes to ban sex discrimination in education and other areas. In 1970, the first contract compliance investigation involving sex discrimination began at Harvard University. Also in 1970, AAUW member Representative Patsy Mink of Hawaii sponsored a bill to outlaw sex discrimination in education. And in August 1971, Representative Mink, along with Birch Bayh and George McGovern in the Senate, introduced amendments to ban sex discrimination in education. AAUW became an important voice in the coalition work that successfully promoted the passage of Title IX. There was no organized opposition, and the conference committee adopted Title IX without giving much consideration to its eventual impact. President Nixon signed the Education Amendments of 1972 in June, and it became effective July 1, 1972. Title IX applies to all educational institutions that receive any federal education money, so that includes private schools. AAUW representatives were at the signing of Title IX. Take a moment to think back to where you were on your life's journey on July 1st, 1972. By the way, earlier that same year, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act was amended in a separate action to cover all employees in educational institutions. Although Congress did not pass Title IX easily or enthusiastically, there was relatively little debate about it. Court-ordered busing was both more visible and more controversial than banning sex discrimination in schools. To a large extent, Title IX did not garner any attention from the media, the public, or from Congress until it was already a law. And then opponents began efforts to weaken the impact of Title IX with these three main targets: coeducational physical education, intercollegiate athletics, and traditional single-sex organizations. The first and largest lobbying campaign against Title IX came from the National Collegiate Athletic Association in 1975. They argued that if colleges had to fund women's athletics more than they already did, implementation of Title IX would essentially destroy major football and basketball programs. Meanwhile, women's athletic programs only accounted for about 2% of the total athletic budgets in colleges. The federal regulations were written by the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, but Title IX was not a top priority, and the regulations did not become effective until July 21st, 1975. To ensure compliance with this law, the Title IX regulations included the requirement for recipients of federal education funding to evaluate their policies and practices, adopt and publish complaint procedures, and a policy against sex discrimination, and to appoint at least one employee to coordinate efforts for ongoing compliance with Title IX. The state of Hawaii, as you know, is a bunch of islands. They have one Title IX coordinator at their home office in Oahu. And there is currently a Title IX case that I know about, and they're trying to rectify that issue. The Office for Civil Rights was charged with the enforcement of the provisions of Title IX. Without a real threat of lost financial aid, school districts and colleges and universities simply chose not to comply with the regulations. This practice continues today, and it is mostly through lawsuits that any progress in compliance has been made, one case at a time. And during tonight's presentation, I will tell you some personal experiences I've had with some of those cases. In the politically conservative early 1980s, the U.S. Department of Justice challenged the broad coverage of Title IX and enforcement and weakened it within the Office of Civil Rights. However, in 1988, Congress passed the Civil Rights Restoration Act, which restored the liability for sanctions to an entire school system or college if they receive any federal education funds. The Supreme Court acknowledged in Franklin versus Gwinnett County Public Schools et al. In 1992 that institutions could be held liable for individuals in those institutions who participated in discriminatory behavior towards females. In that landmark case, the Supreme Court also ruled that plaintiffs could sue for monetary damages. This ruling increased the willingness of lawyers to take on Title IX lawsuits. Title IX was renamed in 2002 after Congresswoman Mink's death and is now the Patsy Mink Equal Opportunity Education Act. AAUW continues to advocate for vigorous enforcement of Title IX and all other federal and state civil rights laws pertaining to education. Here we are in the 49th year of Title IX, and it continues to be attacked on many different fronts. As Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, a person's sex bears no necessary relationship to ability. So I live in California. In California, we have an education code that handles all of our laws. This is how thick it is. Can I show it to you? How thick it is. And it's all our education code. And it was in Sex Equity and Education Act was signed into law in 1982 in California. And in 1994, AAUW member Congresswoman Jackie Spear, she was a state assemblywoman at the time, and this bill was supported by AAUW California. we added a section to the California Education Code that allowed for on-site compliance review activities in elementary and secondary school districts. I was hired by the California Department of Education to develop and implement the gender equity compliant review activities. So I left my classroom and went to the Department of Ed. I was the first employee to be the compliance officer. So we created from a blank piece of paper our compliance work. So I have experience going into our schools and actually seeing the violations. If Hillary Clinton, while she was Secretary of State, hadn't said this first, I could have been quoted. I take it personally. Full equality for women and girls is the great unfinished business of the 21st century, and I will be working on this my entire life. Now, on January 11th, I led an hour-and-a-half webinar for AAUW California, and I had 4 guest speakers. We're using some of the slides from those guest speakers tonight. I'm not going to talk directly to the slides, but we wanted you to have them. So after this presentation, you can print them out if you want to use them, and you'll also have the webinar. If you want the full webinar that we did on the 11th, it's available on the AAUW California website as well, and all the PowerPoint is there for you too. So that I want you to know that there's plenty more information after I finish talking today. So what are the things you need to know about the changes to Title IX sexual harassment? On a personal note, I was responsible for writing the AAUW California letter in opposition of the proposed changes, and I have been so upset since it passed that I have not read the complete changes from under Betsy DeVos. I know that we need to work quickly to get it deleted and replaced with policies that actually protect the students again from sexual abuse. There are many organizations, including AAUW. If you want to read the letter I wrote to Betsy DeVos, it's on the AAUW California Title IX page. There's an organization that was started by young women, college women. It's called Know Your 9. And Laura Dunn, for those of you who were at the last AAUW convention in Washington, D.C., I introduced Laura Dunn for her Eleanor Roosevelt Award. And she's also an attorney that works on these issues. And so I'm in contact with her as well. So I'll be able to feed you lots of information of what we're going to do to turn this back. So Betsy DeVos rolled back the civil rights protection of survivors. The new rules went into effect in August, and it makes it easier for educational institutions to sweep sexual violence under the rug and harder for student survivors to get the support they need to stay in school, and it protects the accused. There are lawsuits pending against all of this, and I just wanted to share that a big law firm that's doing training says the regulations are significant, legalistic, surprisingly prescriptive, very due process heavy, and go well beyond what any court has required under the 5th and 14th Amendment case laws. So I think we're going to be able to get this turned around, but we have to do it quickly. These are the most damaging changes. If you're in the wrong place, if you're off campus, that means you're in the wrong place. So they won't pursue the case. If you and your perpetrator go to different school districts, colleges, they are not in a consortium, you can't pursue a case. So you have to be on the campus. This is a big change. It narrows the definition of sexual harassment to include only instances that are severe, pervasive, and objectively offensive. So they've narrowed the definition, and I could go on for an hour and a half and give you a lesson about that, but we won't tonight. If you report it to the wrong person, if you don't know who to report it to and you tell somebody on the staff and you don't report it to the Title IX, they don't have to take your case. They've added delays. There was a 60-day timeline for the investigation. They've removed that timeline so schools can drag students through lengthy investigations. They have provided that in colleges, the colleges must allow live cross-examinations by the representative of each party's choosing. That means survivors could be questioned by their rapist or any one of their rapist's friends, family member, attorney, anybody. So they're being re-victimized. And they have added in that it's a presumption that nothing happened. So if nothing happened is the presumption they're starting with, they're protecting the accused again. So it's really important that we pay attention to these changes. They also have, once again, said that religious schools can claim a Title IX exemption even after they've been charged with discrimination. Remember, Title IX applies to any and all institutions that receive any federal dollars, but now they've exempted religious exemption. And I think there's a great big case recently of a very a private school. Is it Jerry Falwell's son? I think it is, who just got in trouble for misbehaving. And so these are not good for Title IX. It's made it easier for them to ignore what's going on. So I want to be sure that we all start paying attention, because we really have to turn this around. I'd say immediately in the first 2 years, because we won't know what's going to happen in the next midterm election. And it took 2 years for Betsy DeVos to destroy this section, and we need to get it back. On January 5th, 2021, I saw an article that takes this entire debacle one more step towards additional discrimination. They were working on this up till the last minute, so I wasn't sure what happened. But they were seeking, the Justice Department was seeking to change the interpretation of Title of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, which bars discrimination, as you heard me say. Under these new rules, actions are considered discriminatory if they have a discriminatory effect, what's known as a disparate impact on protected groups. They wanted to change that to be intentional discrimination, but we never want to know what the perpetrator's intent was. It's how it had an impact on the victim. And I just heard last night that one of the 17 executive orders that President Biden signed stops that last minute action taken by Trump. So we at least stopped that. They also had in the works to take to stop protecting LGBTQ rights, and that the definition for sex is what you were born with. And so there's no other choices. And that also, I believe, got struck down last night by President Biden. So as we prepared to do this workshop today, we were looking for sexual harassment cases in your state, and we did find one in Augustana College up in Rock Island, Illinois. A student filed a lawsuit against the school claiming retaliation and discrimination for filing a Title IX complaint, so you can look that one up. I also found another one from a few years back, Doe versus University of Illinois, and this was a Jane Doe attending University High School in Urbana, Illinois. Although the University High was a public school, it was affiliated with the University of Illinois, and they had a responsibility. This was from 93 to 94. So we did find 2 cases in Illinois and many cases in other states as well. So you all know that AAUW LAF has been involved with supporting cases. And I just wanted to quickly tell you that I attended the Hold Mansourian versus UC Davis case, and that's a physical education case, so I know that case quite well. We also had a case, that one was athletics. We also had a case at Feather River Community College, and this is still on the AAUW website. 3 employees got involved because they found out that there was a Feather River employee engaged in inappropriate conduct with female Feather River, and high school students off campus. And so the three reported it. They all lost their jobs, their livelihoods for reporting it. They were all retaliated against. Paul Tyne, who's someone I got to know quite well, he did receive a settlement, but it took until about 2012 before he saw any money. But he owed so much money that that money really didn't come home to help him at all. So there are still a lot of problems happening in sexual harassment. All right, I have to move on to the next section, which is PE and athletics. So with PE, it's important to know that Title IX said that you had to have coeducational physical education. The only time you could separate was in a contact sport for the actual contact activities. So if it's a wrestling team or any other team, they all learn together, but they're broken apart for that contact sport. So that's important to know when we talk about PE before we get into athletics, because I was a former elementary teacher and then moved to the middle school. Well, back in those days, because I'm old enough that I can say back in those old days, we thought free play for PE was just fine. We just let the kids go. But we were not teaching the skills necessary to help our female students become athletes, so that when they hit middle school, they would have the skills to become an athlete. So it's really important to understand that physical education has a lot to do with what happens in PE. I'm sorry, what happens with athletics. And so when you're out and about, I think it's really important to, if you have grandchildren in schools or other kids that you know, to really kind of pay attention to what's going on, because co-ed PE is required. When I moved to the middle school, Dwayne was teaching all the boys PE and Karen was teaching all the girls PE. And this was not that many years ago, way after Title IX. I went up to Dwayne and I said, why are you doing that? You know, this has been against the law since 1972. Nobody in my school district or that school told them that. And me speaking up got them to change. Karen was very upset because she didn't want to do it. But after it changed, they both were very happy. And so there's a lot of problems in PE classes because teachers who were taught the old way were not taught. The female teachers, PE teachers, were not taught to teach team sports. They were taught to teach other things. And so things are starting to change, but we still have a lot of problems. So when I was out doing my compliance reviews, one middle school, the principal kept saying, you are going out to PE, aren't you? You're going to PE. I said, of course I'm going to PE. He knew they were violating Title IX, but he waited for me to come and mark them non-compliant. This was in probably 2002, long after Title IX. So I got to the point where I would go to the superintendent and tell them, this is willful disobedience. You need to look at their credential and perhaps put them in a classroom, because there were too many instances of this throughout California, and they just totally were not doing what they should do. So it's really important to pay attention to that. So now when we talk about athletics, this is where a lot of our lawsuits come up, is in athletics. There's a three-prong approach to athletics, but schools only have to be compliant with one of those three prongs. And the one that they always went after was having substantial proportionality. So that meant if you have 50% males and 50% females, your total sports program should be about 50-50. They wouldn't look at the other two categories. They would just think, oh, we gotta move on, and we gotta stop. So there were a lot of problems. So if you don't have prong one, then you need to do continuing practice to increase the sports opportunities for the underrepresented gender. And the third one is surveying your students to see if you're meeting the needs. The case that Mansourian against UC Davis, they went on prong two, and they lost the prong two case. We won that because they had canceled two female sports somewhere along the line. And once they canceled, that means they had to start again. So that's about what I have time to tell you about PE and sports. Now, if you want to know more, we'll have to do another workshop. So the last section that I want to talk to, because I'm trying to be sure we have enough time for Q&A, and so I got to rush, is what can you just do to support gender equity in the schools? The San Jose branch in California, that for the last 10 years, and this is one of their slides, they've been supporting Title IX. They started out by going to female sports teams at the high school and college levels in their county and putting their rear ends in the seats and supporting what was happening. When I was president of AAUW California, the LA Sparks reached out to me, and I started a partnership with the LA Sparks, a wonderful Black woman who was raised in Harlem, New York, owned the team. And we had an hour private time in their special club, and she came and talked to us. But what was so great is one of my branches brought a girls' high school basketball team with them and a junior college basketball team with them, and she really talked to those students. And I used that opportunity to market AAUW in a new arena of females and males who loved sports. And it was a wonderful thing, but then they shortened the season, so we had to stop. So these are some of the ideas of things you could do there in Illinois. You need to educate yourself more about Title IX. Do your research. I recently Googled Title IX, and I got there were like 300 or 400 million hits that you could look up. So you could Google, you could use AAUW California, and other resources. And we've put resources at the end of this PowerPoint tonight from my speakers that I had. I want you to keep your eyes focused on equity. I've been watching for equity since the 70s, actually late 70s. And in my classroom, when I moved to the middle school, I had a great big poster above the wall that said, education is not a spectator sport. Get off the bench and into the game. And that was a reminder for me and my students that I wanted them all to be fully involved in what was happening in the classroom. So you need to educate yourself and educate the people in your community so they understand the basics of Title IX, that this is a federal law that schools must abide by. They are mandated to do it. And I want you to see something and say something. I have pointed out things in grocery stores. I speak out, and that's what we as AAUW members should do to advocate for those who are voiceless. We have the voice. We have the power, and we need to do that. So I want you to be prepared, and I want you to become the best gender equity advocate you can be. Now, I know I'm behind time, so I'm going to rush through. Wait, no, actually, we're right on time. Surprise, we're right on time to do the Q&A, and then I'm going to do my closing. And I know that I've left you with lots of questions. And so be sure you're getting those written up in the Q&A box. If I don't get to answering them from the Q&A box, I think we have your emails, and I can send out an email. And I just, before I forget, want to say that I did get a response again from your State Department of Ed. I'll be sending that link to your team here that's working behind the scenes, so they can get that information, so you can look at your Illinois policies and procedures. And I'd like you to research your local schools in your community, go online to their websites and find their information. We've given you information about a program a project I was involved with, Opening Doors and Opportunities for Girls. It's on the website, it's on the PowerPoint. And in this, there are 4 sections where you can go to schools and say, we just want to help to be sure you are doing the right thing, or you can get these answers just looking at their website. The first one is, who is the Title IX coordinator? And then there's some questions you can ask to find out who it is, and find out if they have more than one, like one at every school. The second one is on athletics, and that page gives you more information about athletics. And we're not just talking about equal treatment, we're talking about locker rooms and benefits. Lots of times there's a trainer that only services the male teams. They're not servicing the female teams. So we look at all that. We look at the sports fields to see if they're the same. I know an AAUW member whose daughter was a star soccer player. When she went back to her high school to be a coach, she got the worst hours for practice and the worst field. So because she knew me, she knew what to do to speak up to get equity. The next module is on sexual harassment. So you can find out about the sexual harassment policies in your schools and the complaint procedure. And the last one is on pregnant teens. And pregnant and parenting teens are not to be sent away. They're supposed to be getting the services in the least restricted area. And this is another piece that does not get well taken care of. All right, Q&A time. I feel so rushed. This should have been a 3-hour webinar.
Okay, so we've got a question on what is happening with LAF.
That's a good question. LAF, I just was on the website and I had a hard time finding these completed cases. I don't think that there's a lot of new cases that they're working on right now. We have a much smaller staff, and the LAF person is no longer a Title IX expert as we had before. But I am on the National Public Policy Committee, so I have a way in to stir up trouble. So we'll work on that.
Okay. If there is a complaint, a Title IX transgression against a school, is it handled by the state or the federal government?
Because I don't know your state laws yet, federal Title IX, all those cases are resolved by the Office for Civil Rights, and there are regional offices for civil rights. And your state Department of Education is in, not in Chicago, I forget where. What's your state capital?
Springfield.
Oh, that's not where it is. But her name is Cami Pratt, P-R-A-T-T. Her first name is C-A-M-I. And she is at the State Department. And I put a call out to Chicago schools, but I didn't get a response back from them yet. So I don't know in Illinois, but anybody who has a Title IX complaint, because state law supersedes, federal law supersedes state law unless the federal law doesn't cover a particular topic. So all those complaints would go through your local school first, or that won't give you any money. If you're looking to have a much more important case, you can go through the Office of the Office for Civil Rights will take you through that process where you cannot get financial. If you go to an attorney because it's serious, then you can file for financial compensation. So like with the Mansourian case, that one went to an attorney and it went through an 11-year long journey before it came to a decision. And the same thing, the Paul Tyne, the Feather River one went through a different system, the California system for fair employment and housing. But they did get, Paul Tyne got $2 million settlement, but his parents put a second on their house. I mean, he really didn't get much money because he owed so much because of the lawsuit. So lawsuits cost money, and that's what AAUW does to provide assistance. Okay, Elaine.
Okay. Marty Sladak mentions that you want to contact your senators and representatives as soon as possible because the bill to rescind the deadline for the ERA was just reintroduced today. Say yes. ERA will strengthen all the civil rights acts. Lucy Evans has a question.
Before you go on,
okay.
That will help, but it won't turn Title IX around. So we need the ERA, but we need to turn Title IX around. And so as soon as I find out who's going to be the Department of Ed's civil rights person, then I will give suggestions as who we're going to write to. But we do need a letter writing campaign to many people at this point. If we don't get the right woman in there, it's going to be more difficult to get them to understand that gender equity issues are just as important as the racial issues. So I'm waiting to see who gets appointed. Okay, next question. Next question.
An individual said they filed Title IX against the University of Southern California in 1993. It made a fairly big impact on women's athletics at the time. I'm a little surprised that I don't hear much about Title IX, and I'm wondering if there is a database available that tracks Title IX complaints nationwide.
I'm pretty sure there is. I have a number of attorneys I can check with to see what's the easiest way to do that. Because when I did the Google search, I was looking for Title IX cases in schools. It was a little more complicated, but I can check that out for you. And Elaine's going to remind me, and later on, she's going to send me a message to remind me to do that.
Does the EO Biden signed today to fully implement the Cosgrove decision help with Title IX?
I'm sorry.
And can you talk about that?
Tell me.
Does the EO Biden signed today to fully implement the Cosgrove decision help with Title IX?
No, because Betsy was able to completely change it. So we have to go through the whole process again, where we have to write letters, all the comment period. That's why it took her 2 years. We have to go through the whole thing. All it's going to do is help with the non-discrimination, the part about keeping the gay and lesbian, transsexual piece out of it. So I'm not sure, because that just happened yesterday, but I don't think so.
Will the GOP be able to use the filibuster to block any legislative action in this area?
Oh, gee, that I just was hearing on the radio driving over here, because I'm doing this webinar at somebody else's house, so I had better Wi-Fi, that they're talking about getting rid of the filibuster, but with the 50-50 split, if there's not enough Republicans that will, I don't think it'll happen. But I don't think that the Republicans will fight this. They're going to have their minds on bigger things than this, I think. I really don't know. Next.
Are you aware of the Department of Education withholding funds because of Title IX violations? That happened a couple years ago against the Chicago Public Schools. Wondering if that was a first, because I couldn't find other examples. Chicago Public Schools is under a consent decree now.
Ah, I didn't know that. What was the topic? Was it sexual harassment or athletics?
Amy, can you expound on this? Do you know?
While she writes up the rest of that, let's go on to the next question.
Are Title IX coordinators required in schools, colleges, universities receiving federal funds?
They're required to have at least one, and there must be annual notification of who the Title IX coordinator is, the contact, the discrimination rules, the complaint procedures. All of that has to be annually distributed, and that's why we want to give you the information from the survey that we had people here in California do. It was 3 law offices and me representing AAUW. And so we sent it out and had them do the research with their school districts so we could see what was going on. Now, one of the red flags is if the Title IX coordinator is in the personnel office and doesn't work with students, you know right there, that's a red flag. The Title IX coordinator needs to be somebody that deals with student services. Many schools still to this day just put another hat on somebody's head and they know nothing. When we were doing the presentation, I did get the San Francisco Unified School District's Title IX coordinator. She's a past attorney and an athlete, and I known her for quite a while. And so Kiki Williams is on the webinar from January 11th, and you can hear what she talks about her school district. And so if you don't have somebody with Kiki's background who really knows Title IX, then nothing is happening. And I've seen that in many school districts. Okay.
I do not have okay, hold on. We got an answer. It was unreported sex abuse. there was, this is about the Chicago Public Schools. It was unreported sex abuse. There was one coordinator for the system. Search betrayed, and Chicago Tribune. The paper did an investigation.
And it's current. Well, I'll try again getting hold of the Chicago schools person. I sent an email after the secretary, you know, everybody's working at home, and the secretary gave me your email. I'll follow up on that and see if I can get a response as to what's happening. Unless somebody there in Illinois wants to do it and actually show up and, oh, you can't show up because you're working from home, but if somebody there wants to do it, that'd be fine, but I'd be willing to help you out on that.
Okay. Can I, audience, if you have more questions, right now I have to look one more place to see if there's more questions. Somebody is really interested in Title IX. Does AAUW train members on how to become an expert on Title IX?
AAUW, no. I've been doing it because I've been at AAUW California wrote that legislation, and I had been keeping my eyes on equity before that because I was the educational equity chair in 1991. And so I was trained by going to training programs, and there are training programs available. Laura Dunn, D-U-N-N, I just got an email from her that she's doing something this month, and I registered for it. So that's one way to get trained. I can help you out, but it would have to be Zoom because I can't fly to see you right now. And I don't know who in Illinois is an expert on Title IX. There are few of us left, seriously, very few of us left. My mentor is in DC area. So one of the things we could do for that is I could come back and spend an hour, hour and a half and talk about just sexual harassment, or hour and a half and just talk about athletics. When I was doing the trainings in my job at the Department of Ed, it was a 3-hour workshop, and people would say, oh, that's way too long. There's not that much to learn. And then their evaluations always said this should have been a full day. There was way too much to learn. And I was talking to school district employees.
A couple of comments. So good news is from Amy Jo Conroy, Illinois has more protective laws than Title IX, but only for college. And then
you have to remember that Title IX supersedes state law. So if it doesn't talk to what your state laws are, that's a good news. And California, like I showed you, has this huge book for K through university. But if it's Title IX has to supersede anything in the state law if it's the same issue. Another question?
More of a comment.
Okay.
If you could please train new members, and if you could train also on empowering girls and parents.
Empowering girls and their parents.
Yes. Amy Jo, can you expound upon this at all? See if we get a comment. Otherwise, we've answered all the current questions. Does anybody else, would you like to type a question in the Q&A?
Okay, while you're doing that, Laura Dunn is doing it's in April, School Resource Officers and Title IX K-12 Responses to Sexual Misconduct. And it's in a 3-day training thing, and it's like $700. So I wrote to her, reminded her I was AAUW and introduced her, and asked her if I could have her PowerPoints after that time. So I will have her PowerPoints, she said yes, in April. But she's also doing something more recent, sometime next week, that I'm going to watch to see what that one is.
I have a question while you're waiting on others, Cindy. Do you think we have an advocate within the White House in Dr. Biden that might make this a priority in Washington, D.C.?
I will tell you right now that the Biden transition team has already reached out to AAUW. We were very, very well known and loved by the Hill and the White House during President Obama's term. So they've already reached out. And so I think that Dr. Biden, Rosa DeLauro, Jackie Spear, there's a number of women I think that we can write to, so we can do that. So I want to move to my closing, and if another really important question comes, we can stay and answer that. Is that all right?
Well, let me just make a comment.
Okay.
So Chicago branch was asked to lead a training for high school girls to teach them how to use Title IX. The AAUW Chicago branch. So
Okay.
last comment there. Thank you.
When I was at your state convention a few years ago and I did 2 workshops on Title IX, I brought some of my old materials from the Department of Ed. Now, Title IX hadn't changed, so those materials are still current. And I do have some workbooks left. So there are some things that I could help them with if they want help from California. Okay. Okay, so I was trained as a trainer for gender and ethnic expectations and student achievement, and it had a profound effect on my teaching techniques and a positive impact for all of my students. And it's really important that we understand that teacher interaction is probably one of the biggest part of the problem in our schools today, because teachers are not taught about implicit bias. They're not taught to look at themselves and be sure that they're doing things in a fair way. So we all have to take a good look at our own bias and try to keep them under control so nobody knows about them. When I was more involved with this before I retired, I was invited to be a guest lecturer for many college professors for teachers. And one of them first was an elementary group, then a middle group, then a high school group. And the elementary, they were eating up my presentation on this about bias and the training that I was trying to give them on being better with all of their students. The middle school teachers were not quite so good. And then the high school with arms back. But they had to write in journals. And I left there feeling defeated. But the professor told me when they stopped to think about it, they saw the light and realized I was right. I was given an example of a teacher who thought she was always doing the right job. And she'd go around her classroom and tap kids on the shoulder and say, good job, good job. But it wasn't until she was videotaped that she realized that every time she touched a Black child, she went to the sink and washed her hands. That bias was so deeply ingrained in her, she didn't know she was doing it. So all of us in AAUW, we need to think about the words we use and how we act. Do we treat girl babies different than boy babies? Do we treat every child as individuals and help them develop in the way they want to develop and not tell them, no, you can't have this, no, you can't do that? It's so critical to look at the interactions. I'm very careful when I buy things for babies. I don't buy pink and blue. I look at the cards and I make sure that they're gender neutral, because they'll say, oh, this little girl's going to be sweetness and blah, blah, blah. Oh, the boy's going to be active. We cannot do that. So we have to pay attention. RBG also gave another, I have a whole book of quotes, so I'm going to share some of them. This is what she said. I think unconscious bias is one of the hardest things to get at. My favorite example is the symphony orchestra. When I was growing up, there were no women in orchestras. Auditioners thought they could tell the difference between a woman playing and a man. Some intelligent person devised a simple solution. Drop a curtain between the auditioners and the people trying out. And lo and behold, women began to get jobs in symphony orchestras. I also was a member of the National Coalition for Sex Equity in Education for years, and we had conferences all over the United States. That was another way I learned a lot. And I have so many materials from all of those years of doing this. However, it's all pretty much stopped because the Carl Perkins money dried up, and that was money we used to do all these activities together. I left my gender equity position in 2003. I was there developing from a blank piece of paper our compliance reviews, and I was going out to do the schools, but I left and went to categorical complaints management, which handled the complaints, due to administrative decisions that I could not accept. Recently, legislation in California, and this, I'm telling you this because it's a great idea for Illinois. Recently, legislation added a section to our education code that created a Train the Trainer grant program. It awards grants for the implementation of programs to train trainers in gender equity and their video programs. However, no money has ever been appropriated for this purpose. Year after year after year, nobody's putting money into it. But this is an idea for your state AAUW. I can give you the language that's in our ed code, and you can start working on getting some legislation there to have a program that would train the people in all your schools. I can't even imagine how much worse the situation here in California has become since I left my gender equity position. It took them 2 rounds of interviews to find somebody, and she was not an expert. And I found out after she got my job that she was actually sexually harassing some of the men in the department. And I had worked for 8 years teaching those men not to be sexually inappropriate with people on the schools. And then they're calling, telling me that she was doing it to them. So I'm very devastated that I had to walk away. So equity in education is more than putting all students on equal footing. It's eliminating the barriers and stereotypes that limit the opportunities and choices for any and all of our students. So you need to become an equity advocate, and we've talked about that. You need to look at fair play for girls in sports, and that information is also on our PowerPoint from the 11th, because I sit on the Fair Play for Girls in Sports advisory panel. It's run by a law firm here in California that does athletic Title IX cases, and they're very knowledgeable. And 2 of them, one of the attorneys is an AAUW member, and her mother also is a member of AAUW. So their information is also very good. And I'm available to assist you as you move forward. Now, I want you to keep in mind just how long this fight for gender equity has lasted. And we need to make it our personal and collective mission to work for equity for all, so that the next generations will thrive. I'm going to recommend a book. I don't have a slide for it. It's called Romantic Outlaws: The Extraordinary Lives of Mary Wollstonecraft and Her Daughter Mary Shelley. And it's by Charlotte Gordon, G-O-R-D-O-N, Charlotte Gordon, and it was written in 2015. Mary Wollstonecraft, the mother, was born in 1759 in England and died in 1797 during the birth of her daughter, Mary. And Mary Shelley, if you recognize the name but don't remember, as a teenager, she wrote the book Frankenstein. Miss Gordon writes, not surprisingly, in such a climate, critics derided the work of both mother and daughter. Their contemporaries ridiculed and abused them, calling them horrors and worse. Even their own families rejected them. To their enemies, they were like bolts of lightning, destructive and unpredictable. Given the hostility they faced, their story is one of courage and inspiration. Wollstonecraft and Shelley weathered poverty, hatred, loneliness, and exile, as well as the slights of everyday life. The insults and gossip, the silences and turnbacks, in order to write words they were not supposed to write and live lives they were not supposed to live. They sustained themselves by dreaming of the day long after they were dead, when readers would agree with their ideas that women are equal to men, that all people deserve the same rights, that human reason and the capacity for love can reform the world, that the great enemies of happiness and ignorance, poverty, cruelty, the great enemies of happiness are ignorance, poverty, cruelty, tyranny, and that every person is entitled to justice and freedom. Particularly the last one to both mother and daughter, freedom, was what mattered the most, the key that would unlock the gates of change. 2022 will be the 50th anniversary of Title IX. Every one of you has an AAUW story to tell and a legacy to fulfill. We are the living legacy of those 17 women who gathered in Boston. Next slide. It is time for many more AAUW members and friends to make Title IX enforcement a part of their legacy of work. How did the passage of Title IX impact your life and the lives of other members in your family? Have you asked questions? Do you know? Take some time when you are in a reflective mood and think about this. How would my life have been different if I had been born a member of the other gender? It's an important thing to think about. So as you look at the slide, our goal is justice. Equality just gives everybody the same thing, and it helps some people more than it helps others. Equity helps the ones who need more by giving them more. But justice breaks down all those barriers, and that's what we want to do. We want to break down those barriers to full justice. In closing, one more notorious RBG quote. We should not be held back from pursuing our full talents, from contributing what we could contribute to society, because we fit into a certain mold, because we belong to a certain group that historically has been the object of discrimination. And with that, I want to thank you and tell you that if I can do the work I've been doing all these years, I know you can too. You can step outside of your comfort zone. You can speak out. I learned to speak out because of AAUW. I thank all of you for giving me the voice that has helped change this world a little bit. And I want you to use your voice to change the world in your community as well. Thank you, and I think we're pretty close to on time.
Could I ask one more question?
Yes, as long as your people want to stay online, I am here.
Okay. Years ago, AAUW put out a 30-minute video about Myra and David Sadker's studies on discrimination in schools. Is it still available? As a result of the video, I worked to bring the Sadkers to do several workshops in Green Bay. I too heard from teachers who thought they were not discriminating against girls. One teacher kept a log and learned she was not calling on girls equally to boys. Is that training still appropriate today?
I don't know if that video is still there. Myra Sadker has been dead for quite a long time, and I don't think David's doing the work anymore. Phyllis Lerner is the person who really trained me, and she worked under the Sadkers for a while. So I don't know if that's still there, and I don't know how appropriate it is this many years later. But I'm sure we can find other things that are equally good. The training I went through, the sex and ethnic expectations for student achievement, it was the best thing I ever did as a teacher. My students knew what I was doing, and they knew that things were different. I was team teaching with an older man who always had a girls line and a boys line outside the classroom, and the kids always knew that if they were coming to me, it was a mixed line. And so I was battling that in my own school district, my own school, because they weren't doing things correctly. I really was sort of out there. I had a brand new principal one year, but I didn't get to meet him the first 3 days of the school district because I was paid to go to another school district to do their keynote and workshops and train all of their staff. And so he was kind of in awe of me when I came back because he had never had a teacher be in charge of doing those kinds of things. So I know there are other people out there that are doing presentations. I just don't know that older one. I haven't seen that, and so I'm not sure how relevant it would be in this day and age. They put on the screen our AAUW quick facts, and here's some links here where we stand on Title IX. So all of these things are available that you can look at.
And at the top of the slide is the California Title IX checklist.
It's called Opening Doors and Opportunities for Girls. And it's the questions I told you about, where you could look at their handbook. What I used to do when I was doing my on-site reviews, I would get on the phone and call the main line at the school district and I would ask for the Title IX coordinator. And let me tell you, there's a lot of receptionists had no idea who that was or how to even find the person. And once again, this was from 2000 and after. So it's really important for you to find out what's going on in the schools in your community. And then maybe we could have a webinar and you could share what you found, and then we could look at next steps. But so that is a really great, it's not on our website yet. I'm still working on getting my team to post it. In California AAUW, we have a communication team, and I have to go through the protocol to get things posted.
We do have a question asked if the resource URLs can be emailed as a follow-up to the session. Elaine, I was thinking that we would post them on the website.
Certainly, we can do that.
Okay.
So is that okay, Sue? Okay. I'm done.
Okay. And then anything else, my email address, if anybody else wants to get a hold of me, it's my full name, ALICIAHETMAN 15@gmail.com. So it's Alicia Hetman 15@gmail.com. So if anybody wants to get a hold of me and ask more or share more, I'm happy to work with you. And I'm sorry I had to go through everything so quickly, but it's hard to cover all that we did in an hour and a half in an hour, but I think we did it.
Very good. We certainly kept on time and covered a lot. And we'll put a link to the California resources on the Jane Addams website, as
Okay.
well as posting the recording from tonight's webinar. And we thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us and volunteering to keep in touch. I'm hopeful we'll have great things coming and we can do a lot in the state of Illinois.
I'm looking forward to it. I need you to do more.
Now, if